this is going to be a different kind of video. This is not the kind of video that you probably have seen on this channel as much, unless you watched the very first video that I did where I talked about Magic the Gathering being dead, and I stand by most of the points I made in that video. The crux of it was basically that there was a version of Magic the Gathering that existed when I was a kid, and then I left and came back, and that version of Magic has largely died and been replaced with something else. When I was a kid, every single person had a standard deck. That was the way you played Magic. That was functionally the thing that you did at events. That was the thing you did when you went to your LGS. That was what Friday Night Magic was built around. You had either Magic or Draft or what was originally a Magic Arena, which wasn't actually an app. It was a league you played in with your friends, and the more games you won, the more prizes you would get from your LGS. And of course, the prizes would be provided by Wizards of the Coast. I miss that a ton. It's not that I don't like the Commander-centric version of Magic that exists now, but I very much more miss the ability to sit down and play competitive Magic. I was never a professional player back then. I didn't follow the pro scene, and I was never a pro player, but I did play competitive Magic casually, and that is still one of my favorite things to be able to sit down and do, is to be able to jam games of 60-card Magic. And I know there's going to be people who say that what CDH is a good analog for that. And no, it's not. It's not. Every single one of you, every one of you who thinks that CDH is a good analog to 60-card 1v1 Magic, you are all wrong. You can tell me that you're right in the comment section, and I will gladly argue with you there, but I will also stand by the fact that that is an incorrect statement. If you have never actually played against somebody who is running Scam against you in a tournament, like Rakdos Scam, of course, it's not a deck anymore, thanks to Fury being banned, but if you've never sat down and played against that, or Yogg combo, or any of that, I don't want to hear that that CDH is the same. I understand infinite combos and Thassa's, and I play Shalai and Halar, and all that other fun stuff is its own monster in CDH, but the dynamics of CDH are such that there are 4 players at a table, whereas the dynamics of competitive 60-card Magic are there are 2 people at the table. The consistency factor of the two is very, very different. The access to mana is very, very different. There's a lot of variables that make these formats different, and one is not a substitute for the other. I do not think they ever will be. So I don't really want to live in a world where we lose access to Pioneer, Standard, Modern, and all of that. And it's not that there's a threat that we're losing any of that. It's that where I live, every LGS is very Commander-focused. There are some LGSs that managed to get a Pioneer scene going, and there are some that managed to get a Modern scene going, but for the most part, it's Commander everywhere you look here. And that's a weird thing to say, living in the Atlanta region, where this is one of the more competitive regions for card games. It has been the case for Yu-Gi-Oh!, and it is the case for Pokemon, and I would think that it would be that way for Magic as well, but the only way that you can get to that competitive scene is by driving to very specific stores in this area. In fact, there's one very far away from me called Super Games that has a pretty good Modern community there, but they don't have a Pioneer community so much because the Pioneer community got eaten by the Modern community. There's another store that has, their own Pioneer games they do on Wednesdays, and that's cool, but I have a thing I have to do every single Wednesday. I have a collaborative stream, so I don't get to do that either. And typically, this is something that's solved by having LGS choice. I'm spoiled for LGS choices where I am, and yet, somehow, my ability to play 60-card competitive Magic is basically bottlenecked and throttled. And it's because Commander is everywhere. And hopefully y'all can tell from the content that I make, it's not that I dislike Commander. I really enjoy Commander. Commander is a brewer's paradise. You can do so many things in Commander, and it helps me scratch that itch from when I was a kid and thought that Standard was a brewer's paradise where I could play anything that I wanted, and of course becoming an adult realizing that that was never really the case, but I felt like it because losses didn't feel like a waste of my time when I was a kid. I was playing Magic and that was all that mattered. Now I'm realized that, okay, everybody's got access to data, so you need to play something that is strong enough to do well in events, whether it is a meta deck that everybody has access to the list for on a website, or something that you've brewed together that operates within the confines of that format. For instance, Modern being a turn 4 format. If your deck is not winning or stabilizing by turn 4, your deck ought not be in the format. If you're building something that works within those parameters, you can make most decks work in Modern so long as the tools are available in the game for you to use, and they are of the same power as everything else. But Modern is where I've got to talk about more than anything. I've got to talk about that more than I talk about anything else right now, because we have the announcements for Modern Horizons 3, and everybody has already weighed in on this, but I'm going to go ahead and give my piece on it as well, because, again, this format is a baby for me. I adore Modern front to back. I was lucky enough to be playing Scales when Scam was running around rampant, so I didn't have to worry about, like, Hardened Scales has a good matchup against Scam. Just being able to put Stone of Eric in and then throw it at somebody as a win con is just a nice thing. Urza Saga decks do better against Scam than non-Urza Saga decks do, because Stone of Eric is a good card. But, so, Modern Horizons 3 is announced, and the last time Modern Horizons came out, it brought in an artificial rotation to Modern. Now, whether you are a fan of that or not, that is up to you to decide. As for me, I'm used to this kind of stuff. I played Yu-Gi-Oh! Competitively for a long time, used to travel doing tournaments for that, and I learned from Yu-Gi-Oh! That there's only so long that you could play a competitive deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! With only a few exceptions. There are some decks that have been able to stand the test of time, up until the point where the ban list has hit them. And then even then, some older decks would get more support the longer that you went. And so things rotated in Yu-Gi-Oh! Despite it not having a rotation. It was not an enforced rotation the same way that Standard has in Magic or Standard has in Pokemon, but it is still a rotation nonetheless. Cards leave relevance and then either gain relevance as new cards come out that can support them, or the meta shifts in such a way where those cards have more function. For instance, in Modern, cards like Unholy Heat work way better in heavier Planeswalker metas and metas that are very, very creature-based, because it can knock out those kind of strategies really well. If there's not a lot of Grave Hate in your meta, because Unholy Heat is, of course, a Delirium card. So just that exists in Modern as well as anything else. I'm okay with that. I've made my peace with that there are decks that have a time limit in Modern, just like they have a time limit anywhere else. My problem with Modern Horizons 3 is it's the one probably everybody's talked about as well. Why is it that Modern Horizons 3 has commander decks instead of Modern Precon? Like, why? Why does Modern Horizons 3 have commander decks instead of actual precons? Now, to give you guys an example, I want more people to be able to play Modern, Standard, and Pioneer. But I also recognize that the road to playing Modern, Standard, and Pioneer is almost impossible for new players. What do I mean by that? Because, of course, anybody can go online and find a deck and play it and then do well, probably. You can go and look at, if you need a budget deck, you can go and look at one of Saffron Olive's decks, and he does a very good job of putting stuff together most of the time. And you can find something that will let you enter into those formats. Here's the problem. Seeking out that information is something that only an established Magic player does, or somebody who is used to engaging in new hobbies where they have to do a lot of research to get into their hobby. We, as Magic players, should not be okay with a game that does not have a good onboarding process into any of its formats except Commander. If you want to play Commander, you buy a precon from your LGS, you sit down at a table, and you ask the people at the table how to play. And that works out swimmingly well, despite the fact that Commander is a horrible format for learning. That is not just my opinion. There are actually people at Wizards of the Coast that hold that opinion as well because of the breadth of things that have to be learned. Standard is a much easier format for somebody to learn as it has a smaller card pool, and from a teaching perspective, there's only so many strategies you have to worry about that you can adjust to, whereas in Commander, you're constantly bombarded with new information over and over and over, and not everybody can do that when they are just learning a game. So, why are we okay? Like, as consumers of Magic the Gathering product, because we know Modern Horizons 3 is going to sell well. Modern Horizons 2 was one of the best-selling sets of Magic the Gathering's history before Lord of the Rings came and just cleaned house and showed Wizards that they want to invest even more money in Universes Beyond. Again, it's not that I hate Universes Beyond. I think that the Universes Beyond stuff so far has been pretty fantastic. I'm like, there's stuff that I get to enjoy and stuff I get to ignore. I ignored the Doctor Who decks for the most part, except for picking up a few choice cards for my decks. I won't be ignoring the Fallout decks. I was really happy with the Warhammer decks. And the Secret Layers themselves, I think, are probably one of the best ways to do the Universes Beyond thing. Create the Secret Layer and then make the Universes Within thing within a few months or even a year of doing the Secret Layer, so everybody's got access to those cards, but people can play with their Ricks and their Walking Dead characters when they want. I think that's fantastic. Also, the thematic inclusions, like Brothers War, having a literal Brothers War as the analog for the Universes Beyond connection with the Transformers stuff, perfect. And a Brothers War about artifacts, Transformers would have been artifacts in the Magic the Gathering world. Like, that is a home run. Between having that and the bonus sheet and everything, Brothers War was a home run of a set for me. My issue isn't with Universes Beyond. My issue is with Wizards of the Coast blatantly losing sight of their 60-card players, when even their modern set, the set that should be onboarding people into Modern, will functionally not be focused on doing that, because the surrounding product is Commander-focused. Like, we've got, of course, Modern Horizons 3 play boosters, which I'm glad that we've moved away from having set boosters, and draft boosters is a separate thing. We have collector boosters. Obviously, they're going to be way too expensive, like they were last time. Then we've got the Modern Horizons 3 precons. I'm happy that we have a secondary Eldrazi precon, because the first Eldrazi precon was like, you got Kozilek and It That Betrays, and then a couple new cards, and then besides that, it was just a colorless deck. We have, of course, Collector's Edition Commander decks, which are... I have opinions. I have opinions on these. Wizards of the Coast, please stop printing Collector's Edition Commander decks. Not because I think they're a bad product. I think they're a wonderful product to give whales something to waste their money on. No, I think Wizards of the Coast needs to recognize that their printing process is so bad these days that look, I don't want to buy a deck from a potato chip factory. And I recognize that if I buy one of those decks in the collector's version, I'm buying a deck made at the potato chip factory. I cannot. And of course, we've got the pre-release kit, all this other fun stuff. We've got the bundles like we normally would with any big release. But I just have to wonder, why is there no way to onboard people into Modern? So let's talk about the different decks that were brought out for Pioneer. Now, were any of them particularly good? Kind of. And, you know, it's not the worst thing in the world to have okay decks that people can upgrade. It's not the worst thing in the world. Like, if we go ahead and check over here, that first round of precons that had a Burn deck, a Spirit's Kindred deck, Lotus Field combo, and Orzhov Auras, I know plenty of people who took that Orzhov Aura deck and threw Light Paws in it and then ran wild with it at tournaments. That Lotus Field combo, there's people who would not be playing Pioneer, like, at all at my LGS if it were not for being able to buy this deck and then slowly upgrade it. And the fact that you could buy them for so little. One of my favorite decks that I play in Pioneer is my Days Undoing deck, and I literally built the deck off the backbone of this precon right here. The Pioneer Challenger deck, the Dimir Control deck, I bought this because it had my playset of Narsets. It had the Considers that I eventually took out of my deck. It had all of the staple stuff that I wanted. And then it had like a fairly garbage mana base that I was willing to upgrade because I had commander decks that had Watery Graves at the time. So I just took the Watery Graves out of those commander decks and threw them into the Dimir Control deck. My old roommate had the Is It Phoenix deck, and before that had also taken the Gruul Stompy deck and turned it into the Gruul Vehicles deck. Like, so many of the decks that I play and the people around me have played have been built from the backbone of these precons. One of my best friends, who plays in the Pioneer Leagues whenever we have a chance to go, has 2 decks. The first deck is the Orzhov Humans deck, but it was turned into, of course, the mono-white humans, as it should be, because it didn't make sense to have that deck as Orzhov, not really. And making sure that that deck functioned as a mono-white humans deck onboarded him into Pioneer. He started enjoying Pioneer, and then built his own custom Thing in the Ice deck as a Protect the Tower type of deck. And it is a funny deck to watch work. Just being able to play Thing in the Ice and then protect it for so many turns and then wipe somebody's board and smack them in the face repeatedly it is a funny thing to watch. And all of that happened because these precons existed as onboarding processes for people who wanted to play Pioneer. Modern doesn't have something like that. Even Standard had that. The Standard ones sucked. They sucked. I'm sorry. The Standard precons were fairly awful. We had a precon that was unusable out of the box. The Is It Phoenix deck was also unusable out of the box, but that happened after the fact. We had a humans deck that was unusable out of the box. We had a Rakdos vampire deck that had nothing to do with the strategy that was being used in there. We had a Stompy deck being played and during a Standard that didn't have a Stompy deck really at all. Like, it was a confusing amalgam of decks, but at least they existed. If somebody wanted to play Standard, they could pick up one of those decks and they could go into an LGS and they could play. And if I were to say another triumph of the Pioneer ones, the Pioneer decks had Shocklands. Do you know how big a thing that is to hand somebody a Pioneer deck? Not the first set, the second set did. Hand somebody a Pioneer deck, and it's got a fairly mana base. It had temples and all kinds of stuff that just didn't really matter. The Orzhov human decks had the best mana base by far, but it wasn't necessary because you just replaced it all with planes when you built the deck properly. But they had Shocklands in them. The fact that those decks had full play sets of everything they needed, with the exception of one, the Is It Phoenix deck only had 2 copies of Phoenix, but they had full play sets of just about everything you needed, and they had a Shockland, which gives a player, a new player who has never touched Magic before, it gives them an idea of where to go. Let's pretend you live in a world with no data. Like, you're a casual player, you're wanting to buy a deck and play with your friends, you don't want to research this game to hell and back, and to say that the only people who should be allowed to play this game are the people who do put in that time into research is elitist, it's gatekeeping, it's stupid. Please unsubscribe if you are that person. But when you take that person and you hand them that first little piece of power, when they are playing their games, when they're playing with, say, the Is It Phoenix deck, and they play a temple and they miss a spell because they played that temple and they're like, ah, man, that feels awful. But then they get into another game and they play that Shockland for the first time. And they realize, oh, this smoothed everything out so much. I'm going to go get more Shocklands. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. That puts somebody in a position where they are going to now buy singles from the LGS. And buying singles from your local game store is the way that they survive. Sealed product does not, for most game stores, make as much money as it probably should. I know that the price of that product getting higher and higher for LGSs sucks for us, but LGSs don't make money hand over foot that way. They make a lot of their money from singles. So putting a person in a position where they buy that sealed product, they then onboard themselves into being a buyer of singles, and they don't have to do extra research to find out that they need those singles. They play the card and go, oh, I want more of this thing. this thing feels good to play. I want to do this more. These pain lands feel okay. I can keep these in for a while. This shock land, though, this feels amazing. I wonder what other lands there are in this game that would feel just as amazing to play as this shock land. And now you've created a mystique where somebody is going to go research this game further. Not that they have to, not that they should, but you've given them that first little piece, and that is one of the benefits of those precons. So if we had a Modern Horizons precon, what would we want it to be? What would we want it to be? Because we would ideally have 4 of them, ideally, and if we are going by the standard Wizards of the Coast model, then we would need to create analogs to meta decks and not actually meta decks. So if we were to look over at, say, the modern metagame, we would obviously have a Rhinos deck. There would need to be some deck that had the Rhinos package in it. Obviously, the Rhinos package is 12 cards masquerading in a trench coat as a deck, but you would obviously have the Rhinos package. I wouldn't hand somebody Yawgmoth combo, and I wouldn't hand somebody a copy of Scam, because Yawgmoth combo is very, very strong, but if you build it wrong, it simply doesn't work. And Scam, I don't see a world where they would give us a deck with enough Evoke Elementals to function. Not really. But giving us Crashing Footfalls, giving us, say, a Murktide deck, because it's a very, very obvious way to function, giving us a Boros Burn deck of some kind, and then the last one would probably be, it's not even in the top here, awkwardly, there it is, Tron. A Tron deck. Tron is like that eternal thing that always exists in Modern in some way, shape, or form, and it's going to continue to be relevant because of the Modern Horizons set that's coming out soon. So if we had a Tron precon, a Footfalls precon, because Footfalls is used in so many things, it's a great onboarding for other people. Murktide Regent as a precon, because it is a... What is the best way to put this? In a world that lost Luris, Murktide showed you the way. And then, of course, going from these into having your last style of deck. You've got Footfalls, you've got Murktide, you've got Mono Green Tron, and then you've got Boros Burn, because Burn is an easy onboard. I feel like Burn is the easiest onboard for any format. It's the easiest thing for a new player to understand. Giving somebody just you've got an aggro deck, you've got a tempo deck here. Then of course with Tron, you've got a tempo deck as well. So you got 2 tempo decks between Murktide and Tron. And then with Boros Burn, you've got your standard aggro deck, and Crashing Footfalls can be flexible. Footfalls can be a control deck, Footfalls can be a tempo deck, Footfalls can be an aggro deck. It's a very flexible shell that you can build a lot of things into, and a bunch of decks just function off of that very, very well. I don't see them doing like an Orcish Bowmaster style thing at all, so handing somebody, again, Yogg and Rakdos, that's not happening. Point is, that would be like my ideal. Handing players precons that had pieces that they would need to go further into the game. Now, of course, if we did the same thing that we did with the Pioneer precons, then we would of course have to have the modern equivalent of the Shockland. The Shockland is like the gold standard of playing Pioneer, but the gold standard of playing in Modern is the fetch land, because a fetch land doesn't get turned off by Blood Moon, because when somebody plays a Blood Moon, you crack the fetch land immediately, you grab a basic, and you're still good to go. So, Crashing Footfalls would definitely want to have a fetch land, probably Scalding Tarn, but if we had to make it one of the ones that's going to be in the new set, then the only option that you would have would be to have the fetch land from the new set. So you would have to have the red-green fetch land. The Tron deck would probably have a fetch land that could grab a forest, and it would be like the Orzhov deck was in Pioneer, where you have it, and then you just don't want to run it. You have the Orzhov stuff, and then you take it all out. It would be just putting the fetch land in there so that the fetch land was in another deck. And if we did happen to have the other 2 decks that I would have preferred us have, Murktide, it's hard to put anything but a Scalding Tarn in here, but like Scalding Tarn's not going to be in the new Modern Horizons set, so it's hard to push that particular design space, honestly. And I wish that it weren't, but I know that it is. And Boros, for the same reason, Boros would have to have Arid Mesa, and Arid Mesa it's a hard sell to put Arid Mesa in the pre-con when it's not on set. Or, you know, just making sure that a Misty Rainforest is in here, a Scalding Tarn is in here, Boros Burn gets a, whatchamacallit? What am I thinking? Boros Burn gets a Arid Mesa, and then Mono Green Tron could get a Verdant Catacombs. Like, give them fetch lands from the previous sets, and then the justification from play design for putting a single copy of Verdant Catacombs in Mono Green Tron would be that your sideboard would have copies of Dismember. And they'd be like, it's so you can play Dismember without paying life. So you can pay life into this fetch land. But the point is, like, hypotheticals about the kind of pre-cons we could have gotten to get more people into Modern, it's not going to go anywhere. Wizards of the Coast is going to have that fall on deaf ears. Now, if they do decide that we're going to get a Modern pre-con at some point in the next few months, then I will consider myself incorrect, but I will still stand by the fact that the time to make Modern pre-cons is during the release of a Modern set. Like, when Modern is the thing that people are talking about because Modern Horizons is coming out. Instead, the focus seems to have been on Commander. And I know that, well, Modern Horizons 2 brought a lot of cards that people really like playing into Commander. I understand that. I play a lot of Modern Horizons 2 cards in the Commander decks that I can put them in, even if they are, like, if they are within the budget of those decks. I understand that. But, look, here's the other thing. I can build a Commander deck that works for $15. I know this because this has been the main crux of the content on my channel since I started making the content on this channel more of a regular facet of my life. I know that those decks work because I have taken them to my LGS and I have played some very, very fun games with them. It is adorable watching somebody see me crack one of the hidden lands for the umpteenth time while playing Landcat and just going, Wait, you mean you just get to keep getting cards out of your deck for free and I can't stop you? Like, no, you don't get to stop me. I get to keep doing this. This is my land base. What are you going to do? Kill my lands? So, I understand the feeling of being able to take that little bit of power and run it a long way, and that's something that Commander is really good at. Problem, look at the prices of these decks. Look at the average price of the decks that perform well in Modern. Nobody can afford this. Now, I recognize if somebody's like, but I can afford it. No, I don't care. Nobody can afford this. Nobody can afford spending $1,000 on cardboard. Nobody who is a reasonable person is going to be able to say, yeah, I can afford just dropping that right now. And if you want to go, no, you have, because I've seen this comment before, and it's wrong, when somebody goes, no, you can just buy cards one at a time to eventually afford your deck. Like, no, I'm sorry, but as somebody who did that, that is a painful process that is very rewarding when it's done, but it should be unnecessary. Every individual card in your deck being $50 to $60, that should be considered an unnecessary facet of Magic the Gathering. Yes, collectability is important, but we can make collectible variants of cards that we can put that price on. Other games have done this as well. Pokemon is incredibly affordable to play competitively, and yet people still spend oodles of money on Pokemon product. Weiss is affordable to play competitively. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is affordable to play competitively. And yet, in every single one of these scenarios, there's either only like one or two cards that are very expensive, or none of the cards are expensive, and you actually have access to higher rarity variants of cards, and that is what gives you expense index. Magic has slowly been moving into this form of monetization for Magic, making sure that there is whale pieces so that everybody else can enjoy playing the game. And I know there's going to be some people who say that Magic's always been this way. It's always been a very expensive hobby. And yeah, I understand that as well. Thank you very much for falling into that particular fallacy. I appreciate every single one of you that thinks that appeal to tradition makes you smart, but it doesn't. what I want to promote with Magic, first and foremost, is accessibility. I would like people to be able to onboard themselves into this game easily so that they can get to third places and start making friends, making connections, making memories, because that's the kind of stuff that helps people's mental health. Your elitism does not help people's mental health. It does not help people improve. It does not make people want to spend time playing our hobby, playing what many people consider to be one of the greatest games ever designed. A living, breathing ecosystem we all get to take part in that has a rich story and lore and tons of, lore both in the game itself and in the competitive scene and the legends that are made. If I talk about the Borborygmos incident, most of you probably know what I mean when I say that. The fact of the matter is, I want to promote this game being available to everybody to play, and that is in all facets of the game. Not just in Commander. I want people to be able to afford playing Modern. I want people to be able to afford playing Standard. I want people to be able to afford playing Pioneer. I want people to be able to afford playing 60-card Magic as it was originally envisioned and originally designed. Because that is a different game entirely to Commander. And I think both of these games can exist and be focused on very well by Wizards of the Coast, but they don't do that. They've been dropping the ball on 60-card Magic forever, and the only place it feels like you can play it is Arena. And I'm going to be honest, the ecosystem of Arena is bad enough to where I don't want to play on there. It was easy to get my Sheoldreds on there compared to getting my Sheoldreds in real life for my Pioneer decks. That's at least something I was happy about, but it is not a fun environment to play in. The fun environment to play Magic on for me and for many people is the one that lets me sit down and socialize with people. And I don't want that to only be Commander from this point on. But it's looking like that's kind of the way things are going, or at least the way that HasBRO stock prices are determining Wizards of the Coast should go. And the almighty dollar should not be the only determining factor of what matters in Magic the Gathering. This is my dig at MTG Finance Bros. I dislike just about every single one of them. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. This has been my rant on the Modern Horizons debacle. I'm happy that the product exists, and I don't think that we shouldn't have Commander decks centered around them, but I think that it's superfluous with all of the other Commander product that has been released. I think that we need to give a bone to 60-card players like myself, as well as the pre-cons that have been out and about for Commander for ages. Please, Wizards of the Coast, don't forget your 60-card formats. Modern Horizons 3 is not just a legal set to print Commander cards in, which is kind of how Lord of the Rings ended up being. It's not just a modern legal set to print Commander cards in. It should be a set that 60-card players can enjoy a lot and have a chance to play. And the only way that 60-card players get a chance to play 60-card Magic is when Wizards of the Coast makes it easiest as possible for people to onboard into 60-card Magic. You don't have a Modern tournament without people that have Modern decks, and you don't have people without Modern decks without prior interest into Modern, and you don't have prior interest in Modern without people who have Modern decks available to them easily. You simply don't. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you haven't already, and there will be more Commander content as soon as this video is over. But I needed to get my voice out here in regards to the Modern Horizons stuff. Insert end of video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability that Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here. And they would be Red Joker, Blitzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Mabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, Sagitt, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.